Thank you. As Jeremy said, we have a lot of classes and things starting, and look on the website, please. I also want to highlight our wellness ministry, and I really personally just become fascinated with the intersection of spirituality and our physical bodies. And in Genesis, we're told that God took what in Hebrew is adamah, which is dirt and mud, and breathed his breath into it, and the dirt, Adamah, became Adam, human. And that intersection is just, I think, more and more fascinating. And as you really study in both the Old and the New Testament, we find, especially Jesus' healings, how many are intertwined. The physical and the spiritual, just so integrated. Actually in Greek, when it says someone is like moved in their heart, it's actually they're moved in their gut. The term is splagnizomai. And I've been working on, a lot of you know this, but on a movement coaching program, and I just finished well over 100 hours. And wrote a curriculum kind of reflecting on spirituality and our physical bodies and using lever tools. And usually, you go to the gym and it's all kind of push-pull, right? And God created us to move in 6 directions, and I think this is just so important. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have a bunch of other classes, but I'll be teaching a class entitled Being Human. And we'll just work on, our ability to rotate and moving as God created us and designed us to move. And so I'd like to just welcome you if you'd like. There's no cost. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9:15, but we have quite a few other classes as well. And I just think I'm really excited for this kind of new venture that we're moving into. You'll hear more other components that we're working on, just creating spiritual plans for individuals, trying to look at like a 360 view of what God has really envisioned when we think about being human. We're working our way through Matthew's gospel. And Matthew divided into 5 sections. We've talked about this. It's modeled after the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the thing is, the Torah, it was the story of how God created a special people. But really, the heart of the Torah, it's not just the story of how this happened, but it's a vision of how these people are supposed to be in community together, with God, with one another, how God desired community to occur within his people. And so Matthew modeled his gospel after the Torah. And we've been working through this, the gospel according to Matthew. It's the story of Jesus and his disciples, but it's also the story about how disciples are to be in community. When we think about the church, what we're supposed to do, what we're supposed to be together. So we're in the 4th book of Matthew. Basically, the end of chapter 13 runs to the end of 17. And we said last week, this part of Matthew, it's really the gestation part of the early church. It's not the birth of the church. That's going to happen at the end of the gospel. But this is the most concentrated part of Matthew that focuses on the church out of the whole gospel. And in this section, Jesus, on one hand, he starts predicting his passion more and more and more, but also simultaneously, he is preparing his disciples to continue his ministry, to continue his work after he's gone. So we left off last week, book 4, chapter 16. I'm going to pick up there. Simon Peter, if you remember, he declared what had been only hinted at throughout the gospel. And Peter just comes out and says it. Matthew 16:15-16, he says, "Who do you say I am?" Jesus says. And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." We move on into the next verse. Jesus answered, "Blessed are you." It's like a beatitude, beatitus. Simon, son of Jonah, blessed are you. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter. In Greek, it's, you are rock. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And we talked about that last week, and I'm not going to go over that again, but there is a word play, and it's so important with the word Petros in Greek, and it means rock. And so Petros, it was not a personal name up until this point. Historians tell us. It just meant rock. And so Jesus, he's not renaming him as much as saying, you, Simon, you are rock. And I'm going to build my church on this rock. Peter really got it right for a couple minutes. Listen to the rest of the story. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples he must go to Jerusalem, undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day rise. Peter took him aside, began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block. You're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. So right after Jesus renames Simon Rock, said he's going to build his church on this rock, he calls him Satan. And he says he's a stumbling block. The word in Greek for stumbling block, it's scandalon. And you can hear the word scandal in there, scandalon. But there's way more going on, because a scandalon was a rock that you tripped over. And we're supposed to hear Jesus. He renames Simon Rock, says he's going to build this rock, his church on this rock, but then just a couple minutes later, he calls him a stumbling rock. What does that mean? What is stumbling rock? Well, there's a clue here when he says, get behind me, Satan. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus said something very, very, very similar. When the devil tempts him with easy glory. Matthew 4, the devil took him to a very high mountain, showed him all of the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said, all of these I will give to you if you fall down and worship me. And Jesus said, away with you, Satan. It's written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him. Now, I know that doesn't ring out in English like it does in Greek, but when the devil tempts Jesus, he basically says the exact same thing to Peter. The Greek behind away with you, Satan, is upage satan. Get behind me, Satan, is upage opizomou satan. And we were supposed to hear this link is the point, because Peter is repeating the devil's temptation. Suffering and death, that'll never happen to you, Jesus. Right after Peter professes who Jesus really is, the Messiah. Peter got the title right, but he had the wrong job description. He had an old job description, let's say. He had the wrong definition for Messiah. Peter, everybody else, they thought the Messiah's job was to lead people to march into Jerusalem, to take it by force. There they would install Jesus as king, and that's how God's kingdom would come. That's how the Son of Man would be exalted in this kingdom. But that was not Jesus' vision of Messiah. Were they going to Jerusalem? Yeah. Were they going to bring about God's kingdom? Yeah. Would the Son of Man be exalted as king? Yeah. Would he dispense justice to the world? Yeah. But the path Jesus was going to do this was the exact opposite way that Peter and the disciples expected. Jesus was going to confront the rulers. Jesus was going to confront the authorities, the chief priests, the scribes. But Jesus said, in the midst of it, he would be killed. Peter thinks Jesus lost it. And I think his chest is probably a little thumpy here, puffy with this new title, Rock. He figures he's going to, stand up and correct Jesus on this. He was wrong. Jesus doesn't just correct Peter's vision of Messiah. He says those who would be his followers, they're going to have to walk the same journey. Jesus told his disciples, if anyone wants to become my follower, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake will find it. What will it profit if they gain the whole world, but they forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? Here's the tough part for us today. Are we going to buy into the same vision that Peter had for Messiah? The same temptation that Satan tried on Jesus? Throughout this whole section of Matthew is not only painting a picture of who Jesus is, he's painting a picture of what it looks like to follow Jesus. Then and now. And I think at this point we have to deal with a question: what is glory? And what does glory look like? There's two versions of glory here, right? I mean, one is a picture of glory from the kingdom of heaven. And the other is a picture of what the world would call glory. And that's the one that Satan was tempting Jesus with at the beginning of the gospel. And Jesus walked away from Peter and the disciples. They had a hard struggle, the disciples walking away from this vision of glory. And I wonder how we do with it today. This is about following Jesus. A follower goes where their leader goes. A follower does what their leader does. That's the definition of disciple. Will we follow where Jesus goes? Or will we talk ourselves into watering down Jesus' vision of disciple? Jesus doesn't just take the path to the cross. He calls us to take the same path. Follow me. This is the way. If you want to follow me, pick up your cross and let's go. I love, there's some imagery I came across from N.T. Wright, and he was reflecting on this. He said this call, it's a call which rings down the centuries like a great bell. A bell in a distant church, and it's calling us from whatever we're doing. And imagine a bell echoing through the streets of town. Pick up your cross and follow. Pick up your cross and follow. And the sound, it resonates through shops and through offices and through schoolrooms and through hospital wards, through bustling tenements and lonely apartments. Pick up your cross and follow. Imagine people coming out of their doors to see where the noise is coming from, and they listen to this great bell, and there walking ahead of them is Jesus. Compelling. Pick up your cross and follow. Following him will cost everything, but will receive everything because he gives everything. There are no half measures. It's like learning to swim. If you keep your foot on the bottom of the pool, you're never going to know how to do it. You have to lose your life to find it. What is the use of keeping your foot on the bottom when the water gets deep? You have a choice. You swim or you drown. apparent safety, walking on the bottom, is no longer an option. Cling to your life, you lose it. Give everything you've got to follow Jesus, including your life itself, and you'll win everything. Will we take Jesus seriously? Will we follow Jesus? We're going to come back to that in a minute. I want to go on to the next section. It is all connected. 6 days later, Matthew chapter 17, verse 1. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, John, and led them up the high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became a dazzling white. And suddenly there appeared Moses and Elijah talking with them. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." And while he was speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed. And from the cloud, a voice said, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard, they fell to the ground. They were overcome with fear. And Jesus came and touched them and said, "Get up, do not be afraid." When they looked, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. It's the story of the Transfiguration. I've always been fascinated with this story. And over the years, I've come to realize the Mount of Transfiguration is a parallel to the hill of Calvary. What do I mean? Maybe it's better said, the Mount of Transfiguration is a contrast to the hill of Calvary, where Jesus was crucified. And the mountain and the hill, they work together and they balance each other. On the mountain of Transfiguration, Jesus was revealed in glory. On the hill called Calvary, Jesus was revealed in shame. On the mountain, Jesus' clothes were dazzling white. And on the hill, soldiers stripped Jesus of his clothes. They gambled for them. On the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus was flanked by 2 of Israel's greatest heroes, right? Moses representing the law, Elijah representing the prophets. You remember what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount? He said, "I didn't come to abolish the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill them." Here, we're supposed to see the law and the prophets flanking the Messiah. On the hill of Calvary, Jesus was flanked by criminals. They represent how far Israel declined, how far they descended in their rebellion against God. On the Mount of Transfiguration, a bright cloud overshadowed everything, just like when Moses received the commandments up on Mount Sinai. On the hill of Calvary, darkness overcame the land. On the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter, he can't believe how wonderful. He just wants to stay and he wants to revel in the whole experience forever. And on Calvary, as Jesus hung on a cross, Peter hid in shame after he denied he even knew Jesus. On the Mount of Transfiguration, the voice of God declares, "This is my Son." On the hill of Calvary, Jesus Christ, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And after he died, completely abandoned and alone, only a Roman soldier was left to declare, surely this was God's Son. On the mountaintop, we get a vision of the hilltop, and vice versa. We can only begin to understand one when we see them side by side. We need to see the glory in the cross, and we need to see the cross in the glory. I think only then can we really begin to understand our call as Jesus' followers and what he really meant when he said, "Take up the cross and follow. You know, the world today is in a massive, massive transition. And I think we're moving closer and closer to a narrative that's about easy glory. I mean, wealth and power and stuff. That's the reward. And the seduction of the path of least resistance. No pain, lots of gain. It's not new. I mean, it was the heart of Peter's response to Jesus in 16. And it goes back to Matthew 4. It's the same temptation the devil tried on Jesus. There's always been a temptation, I think, for the church here, for disciples to buy into this temptation. Because it's what we want to hear. You can have it all. I mean, you pay now, or buy now, pay later, or don't even bother paying. The world is painting a picture of glory. And unless the path of glory includes the path to the cross, it's just seduction. It's a temptation. And it's half of the story. The world today needs Jesus' followers, the church, to follow Jesus. You know, tomorrow we remember Martin Luther King Jr. and we inaugurate a new president. And regardless where you are politically, you got to admit, this inauguration is a statement that our country, our world is changing. And tomorrow's a huge, huge step in a change of direction. And as we take this step, I think we need to remember the words of Martin Luther King Jr. The time is always right to do what is right. There is a path of temptation that seduces us to worldly glory. And there is a path to heavenly glory. What is the path for those who would follow Jesus? The path of sacrifice. The path of putting the needs of others ahead of the needs of the self. The path of the cross. That is the path of Jesus. And that is the path of his followers. Would you pray with me? Lord, as we reflect on the mountain and the hill, we hear your voice. Follow. Open our eyes to see our cross and fill us with your Spirit, that we might have the strength. In Jesus' name, amen.